have seen this story for quite some time now, for a couple of years, and it's always been highly recommended, even potentially highly praised for being rather out there, right? I finally had the opportunity to read it after a lot of you recommended it, and I'm a little bit disappointed. To be fair, my expectation was a little bit over-exaggerated, so it's partially my fault, but I actually thought this series was something else entirely. This series is known as Juujika no Rokunin, and you've probably heard of it before by other people. Originally, I thought this was some sort of fighting, boxing, revenge manga, right? Meaning that the main character probably got bullied, came back a couple of months, maybe a couple of years later, and potentially fought all of his bullies. This is kind of the case, but without the fighting, and more so horrendous torture and killing. So I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, this is somewhat of a twisted fantasy, right? There's going to be something more here to add on to all of this torture and to all of this killing and to all of this brutality, because mind you, it is endless brutality. It is disgustingly descriptive in both its explanation and its showcase within artistry. So I'm waiting, and there's never really anything else that pops up. There's no real purpose or meaning, right? This doesn't make it inherently bad. This doesn't make it the worst thing to ever exist. But for myself personally, I struggle to connect to stories that only do the things they're doing for shock value, especially in the gruesome torture department, right? If you're reading this story, the one thing that's going to make you continue reading this story is how brutal it is how much torture there is, and how that is ultimately used as this climatic peak and shock value every single time, because it changes. It's constantly moving and shifting, and then you sprinkle in some pretty other horrendous stuff in there and it keeps you entertained. The story itself is very simplistic and serves a purpose, and that's about it. So this may sound pretty harsh, but honestly I really wanted something more from it. So I'm not really one to outright hate a story or to think it's the worst thing to ever exist. I like to give things a chance. I like to try to understand the perspective or the scope of what the story is trying to tell, even if it isn't technically up my alley. This, however, just kind of feels like joyful misery, meaning that similar to the Saw movies or any sort of horror movie that completely relies on jump scares or disgusting showcases of things, this manga's whole purpose or its value that you're going to get from it is from all of these horrendous torture scenes. They are very much detailed, they are very descriptive, and then there's random, kind of even weirder stuff that's just disgusting sprinkled on between it that just happens because why not? And that's where it overwhelms itself with all of this disgusting stuff. But in saying that, let's have a look at the story. We follow our main character, Shun Uruma. Pretty normal boy. He has a loving family, he has a younger brother, and a very mysterious grandfather that he's not allowed to see. Now, Shun as a child would be horrendously bullied, horribly so, by 5 very specific individuals. Now, these 5 all have unique traits and quirks and bullied Shun in a varying different ways. To put simply, these 5 are not children. They are monsters, and they are orchestrated by one specific being within the group that's considered the leader. Their name is Kyo Shigoku. Kyo would come up with the brilliant idea to really warp and manipulate Shun far beyond what is humanly possible. They earned for Shun to kill themselves, and Kyo wanted to have that power over another human being, the power to force someone to take their own life. The way Kyo and everyone else tried to do this, other than horrendously bullying Shun, was to actually kill his family, and they partially managed to succeed by crashing them off a cliff. However, Shun's younger brother would actually survive this situation and get put into a coma. With nowhere else to go, Shun would start to live with his grandfather, where we would find out that he has quite the interesting past. He is someone that was heavily involved in some very prominent military things and has gone through a litany of different trainings and torture methods and things to kill and survive while on the battlefield. All of these things would be taught to Shun, and only a handful of years later, Shun would return or re-emerge with this very concrete intent to kill these 5 individuals that destroyed his childhood by taking everything that he learned from his grandfather within these years, training his body, training his mind, training his emotions, every way to kill, every way to torture, to give it to the 5 bullies. Revenge his brother and his family. And one by one, he would slowly do it, killing them off bit by bit in the most horrendous ways possible, until he gets to the mastermind of it all, Kyo. until the bigger picture comes out to play. This would be the story of Juujika no Rokunin, and as you can probably tell, it's a revenge story, one that's filled with horrendous criminal activity within it. A lot of disgusting torture and killing methods and stuff to really break apart these bullies. And on one hand, you're kind of cheering for Shun, the main character, to get his revenge, because you see how disgustingly bullied he was as a child, and of course what these bullies done to his family on purpose. But then there comes a point where the main character kind of loses sight of himself, and it's purposeful, it's with intent, but as a reader, it's very difficult for yourself to support it. It's difficult for yourself to kind of indulge within it or even enjoy it, because the main character is going above and beyond to satisfy his revenge, to the point where innocent people are getting involved, people that aren't even related or correlated to the situation at all, just general bystanders. Not only is Shun trying to kill his bullies in the most horrific way possible with these insane torture methods that he learned from his grandfather, innocent people are being caught in the situation and killed as well. Very difficult to support that, and because of this, you slowly start to lose sight of your main character. And I think a lot of stories similar to Juujika no Rokunin have this problem, where they rely so much on this disgusting element to keep pushing things forward. The main appeal of this story is the torture methods. There's realistically nothing else here other than maybe a bit of relationship building between some other characters, but even then, just as quickly as they are introduced, they even more quickly backseated, and I'm very confused on why. There is easily so much potential to play on Shun's morality, or to play on his emotions, to make him more human after all of this development and growth that he's gone through as a monster, as someone that isn't necessarily human. And there's even things within the story that points to it actually happening. Certain characters that he meets or befriends is stuff that he has not experienced before, yet very quickly it unravels itself in the most disgusting of ways possible and completely corrupts this image that was slowly being built for his character. So he starts to spiral even more and makes the redemption of his character even less of a possibility, which makes me think by the end of it, he'll either be killed or randomly do this 180 flip where he goes to prison, and that's basically it. But see, there's no real build up for it. Once again, as quick as it's introduced, it just as quickly disappears. So there's these very small pockets of hope where you see these other characters come in helping Shun, building him up, trying to make him a better person, allowing him to experience these new things, all while he's trying to kill these bullies. And he feels emotions that he hasn't felt before. But then something unnecessarily horrific or just out there will happen to one of them, and Shun will disconnect himself, and that is the last time you'll ever hear about it. I think the oddest thing about it is that it takes Shun a handful of actual wild situations to random people that shouldn't be involved for him to actually disconnect from people. Now mind you, he was disconnected at the beginning, but he slowly became connected, and then after witnessing 3-5 handful of events happen to people that shouldn't have happened, he starts to actually disconnect himself once again. It's hard to really make sense of the situation on what Shun is even trying to do. He gets blindsided and distracted so easily, yet the story does not want to fully dive into that idea or to fully play upon it. And I don't know if it because it seems too difficult or too much work, or the story doesn't want to go that way, or that's not the whole point of the story. It's just very odd choicing, because there very much is potential to extrapolate it into much better things. Give me a reason to care about this story other than the torture, because the torture gets boring very quickly, I'll put it like that. And I don't want to sit here and negatively just destroy the story or say it's the worst thing to exist, but if you're looking for a story that only has torture to it, that is strung together with a very simplistic revenge plot, by all means you will love this. It's very over exaggerated, it's very over the top, it's sprinkled in with all of this other horrendous stuff, and you'll probably enjoy it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But because there is pockets of really good moments within there, I'm disappointed that none of it is ever played upon, that none of it is taken a step further to truly bring some sort of dimension or substance or finesse to Shun as a main character, because there's all the qualities there for him. He has a brother that's in a coma, he has a grandfather that is so warped from his experiences within the war, he has bullies that are so varied between each other, and Kyo, the leader of them all, the mastermind, is so manipulative, is building a cult, is building this revolutionary type thing for new humans. The story only as of recently has converted into something much bigger, but there was barely any build up for it. There's some sort of police subplot within within here, as well as Kyo building some sort of cult or revolution. That's it. All while Shun is getting outsmarted by Kyo. The artwork is very nice though. It's very pretty. It's very detailed. A lot of the torture scenes are drawn very well and with a lot of excruciating emphasis on a lot of different things. There is some sections that are completely censored or blacked out because it's just disgusting through and through. But for the most part, you'll get the general idea. Now that I think back on it, I do think this is my fault for expecting something else, to be honest. I think the story is fine, potentially even great for what it wants to do, which is just showcasing torture and having this very point A to point B revenge plot to it. There's nothing wrong with that. However, when I went into it, I just wasn't expecting it. And it continuously tried to one-up itself in those torture departments and nowhere else. So while there was a good amount of moments that it felt like it was going to bloom into something else and to evolve its narrative experience, it ultimately fades away. It dies off before it even starts it, and it's very disappointing. Knowing that the potential could have been coupled with such a disgusting showcase of things would have had this really interesting dynamic and probably would have played with your moral compass a lot more. It would have made you conflicted as a reader, but with that obviously comes finesse. With that understanding of building such a duality driven character where they're blooming into more human but also devolving into a monster, having them entangle with one another and ripping it apart and blurring the lines would have been so interesting to read. Unfortunately, that is not the case in the slightest. Instead, it's either all in or all out, mixed with very visualized torture scenes that continuously try to one-up itself and are over-exaggerated for no reason other than the fact that is shock value, and that is what the story's true purpose actually is, as well as putting in very unnecessary, overblown violence, gore, and even worse, to characters that aren't even a part of the situation, just for that sheer fact of shock, to make you sit there and feel disgusted. I suspect a lot of people will read this story and drop it just as quickly. I can't confidently and happily sit here and recommend it because it's not going to be for everyone. It certainly wasn't for me. But if you are someone that is into these type of stories, if you're someone that's into Saw, if you're someone that's into showcasing these horrendous things and that's kind of the purpose of those stories or medium, whatever it is, you may enjoy this. It has enough of a story, of a plot to progress things forward, and then you get that very oddly placed pinch of dopamine from those very visual disgusting moments. And I get that that is 100% up people's alleys. Personally, this story was not for me, and overall I am a little bit disappointed with the potential it could have had, but it's serving its purpose, it knows its own value, and it's doing what it wants to do. It doesn't seem like it wanted to touch any of the other topics as much as I wish it did. I do not recommend this manga, unless this is something that is very specifically and technically up your alley. Even then, I do warn you, it is very graphic, it's very overwhelming, and very disgusting. Endtime. So with that, welcome to the end of the video. If you have made it this far, thank you. I appreciate you. If you have read or tried to read Juujika no Rokunin, let me know how you feel about it. I think a small portion of people might have enjoyed it for what it's worth, and that's perfectly fine. Personally, I just did not have a fun experience with it. I honestly wish there was more for it. And while it does what it's doing well, that bar isn't necessarily high to achieve. But even then, it is each to their own. Some of you may absolutely love this story for what it does, and that's entirely up to you, and that's all that matters. So do let me know in the comment section below. But with that, I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. Drink plenty of water, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.